The cigarette smoke hung thick in the briefing room beneath Karlshorst, East Berlin. Major Irina Volkova sat rigid in the wooden chair, her pale blue eyes fixed on the photographs spread across the table like a deck of cards revealing someone else's fate. The face staring back at her from the black and white surveillance shots was unremarkable at first glance. A man in his early 30s, dark hair swept back, strong jawline, the kind of face that disappeared easily into a crowd. That was precisely what made him dangerous. "David Ashford," Colonel Dmitry Petrov said, tapping the photograph with a thick finger. His voice carried the weight of decades in intelligence work, each word measured and final. Cultural attaché at the American Embassy. Officially, he organizes art exhibitions and jazz concerts. Unofficially, Petrov slid another photograph across the table. This one showed the same man entering a building near Kurfürstendamm, carrying a leather briefcase. He coordinates CIA operations throughout West Berlin, dead drops, agent handling, communications with Washington. Irina studied the images with professional detachment, the way she'd been trained at the Red Banner Institute outside Moscow. 5 years of preparation. Languages, seduction techniques, weapons training, psychological manipulation. She'd operated in Vienna, Copenhagen, and Paris. She'd extracted secrets from businessmen, scientists, and military officers. She'd never failed a mission. She'd never questioned an order. "Your cover is solid," Petrov continued, lighting another cigarette. The orange glow illuminated the deep lines, etched into his face, testament to countless operations, countless sacrifices for the motherland. "Katya Orlova, émigré from Riga. Your family fled during the war. You grew up in displaced persons camps, eventually made your way to West Berlin. You work as a translator at the Charlottenburg Publishing House. We've already placed you there. The Americans have no reason to suspect anything." He paused, letting the smoke drift toward the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Ashford is a creature of habit. He drinks at the Café Einstein every Thursday evening, alone. He attends the Philharmonic once a month. He walks through the Tiergarten on Sunday mornings. He's lonely, Volkova. His wife left him 2 years ago, returned to America. The file says he blames himself, worked too much, lived too much in the shadows. Men like that. Petrov's smile was cold, clinical. Men like that are vulnerable. Irina nodded, her expression unchanged. She'd heard variations of this briefing before. Every target had a weakness: vanity, greed, ideology, loneliness. The key was identifying it, then exploiting it with surgical precision. Emotion was a tool, nothing more. Sentiment was a liability that got agents killed. "Timeline?" she asked, her voice flat, professional. 6 months maximum, Petrov replied. "Build the relationship, gain his trust. We need the communication protocols for NATO's rapid response network in Central Europe. Encryption keys, contact lists, operational procedures. Once you have them, you'll receive final instructions." He didn't need to elaborate. Irina understood what final instructions meant. A car accident on a rainy night, an apparent heart attack. A suicide, perhaps, if it could be staged convincingly. Clean, untraceable, necessary. "The Americans are planning something," Petrov added, his tone darkening. "Our sources indicate increased activity across all CIA stations in Germany. We believe Ashford is coordinating preliminary operations for a broader offensive, perhaps an attempt to compromise our network in the East. Your mission isn't just intelligence gathering, Volkova. It's disruption, neutralization, protection of Soviet interests in the most critical theater of the Cold War." She stood, gathering the photographs, committing every detail to memory before sliding them back across the table. 6 feet tall, athletic build from years of training, light brown hair that she would dye blonde for the operation. A face that could be called beautiful, though she'd learned to modulate her appearance, more approachable than striking, more trustworthy than seductive, at least initially. "When do I cross?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. Checkpoint Charlie. You have 48 hours to establish yourself before making first contact. Petrov stood as well, extending his hand. His grip was firm, commanding. The motherland depends on officers like you, Volkova. Remember that when things become complicated, they always do in the field. Maintain discipline, trust your training, complete the mission. Irina returned to her apartment in Lichtenberg as dusk settled over East Berlin. The building was standard Soviet construction. Grey concrete, small windows, the smell of boiled cabbage and coal smoke permeating the stairwell. Her flat was sparse, a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, a hot plate, a radio that only received approved frequencies. She owned nothing that couldn't be abandoned in 30 minutes. She spent the evening reviewing her cover story, rehearsing the biographical details until they felt more real than her actual past. Katya Orlova had a dead brother, a mother who died of tuberculosis in 1951, a father who drank himself to death 2 years later. Katya loved Tolstoy and Brahms. Katya dreamed of visiting Paris someday. Katya believed in God, quietly, privately, the way many émigrés did. Katya was lonely, searching for connection in a city divided by concrete and barbed wire, by ideology and fear. At midnight, Irina allowed herself one moment of genuine reflection. She stood at the window, looking out at the darkened city, the few lights that burned in apartment blocks, where families slept, where children dreamed, where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. She'd given up that possibility years ago, when the recruiters came to Leningrad State University and saw something in her, intelligence, discipline, coldness perhaps, a willingness to serve without question. She told herself it was patriotism, duty, protection of the socialist future against American imperialism. But in quiet moments like this, she wondered if it was something else entirely, an escape from normalcy, from the suffocating predictability of marriage and children and growing old in a communal apartment. This life offered purpose, importance, the intoxication of secrets and power. Tomorrow, she would become someone else. She would cross into the West, into the territory of the enemy, into a world of deception where every smile was calculated and every word a potential trap. She would meet David Ashford. She would make him trust her. She would take what she needed, and if necessary, she would kill him. The wind rattled the window frame, carrying the distant sound of a train moving through the night. Irina turned away, methodically packing the small suitcase that Katya Orlova would carry into her new life. False documents. Worn clothing appropriate for an émigré of modest means. A photograph of people who weren't really her family. A small Orthodox cross on a silver chain, theatrical prop, useful for establishing credibility. She felt nothing. That was important. That was survival. At least that's what she told herself. The Café Einstein occupied a converted villa near Kurfürstendamm, its high ceilings and dark wood paneling offering a refuge from the cold Berlin winter. Irina, now fully inhabiting the identity of Katya Orlova, had been observing David Ashford for 3 weeks, learning his patterns, his preferences, the way he interacted with waiters and shopkeepers, the books he read while nursing his bourbon. She'd learned he was punctual to a fault, arriving at the cafe every Thursday at 7 o'clock precisely. He always sat at the same table near the back, positioned to observe the entrance, while maintaining a view of the street through the tall windows. Tradecraft, even in his leisure. He read American newspapers, the Herald Tribune, sometimes the Washington Post, flown in weekly. He avoided conversation with other patrons, polite but distant, a man who'd built walls around himself. On this particular Thursday evening, as snow began to fall softly over the divided city, Irina made her move. She dressed carefully. A simple blue dress, wool coat, no jewelry except the Orthodox cross. Her hair was styled modestly, her makeup minimal. Katya Orlova wouldn't draw attention, wouldn't appear to be trying too hard. She carried a worn leather satchel containing Russian translations of American novels. Her cover job at the publishing house made this natural, expected. The cafe was moderately crowded, the warmth and coffee aroma a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside. She scanned the room with practiced casualness, her pulse steady despite the significance of the moment. 3 years of preparation had led to this, the first genuine contact, the beginning of the operation. David Ashford sat at his usual table, absorbed in a newspaper, a glass of bourbon beside him. Even in repose there was a tension about him, the alertness of a man who couldn't fully relax, whose mind remained perpetually tactical. Irina had read his file so many times she'd memorized it. Georgetown University, recruited by CIA in 1953, stations in Rome and Athens before Berlin. Divorced, no children. Father died when he was 16, mining accident in West Virginia. Mother remarried, relationship strained. A man shaped by loss and duty, by the gap between American idealism and the moral compromises of intelligence work. Understanding the target was everything. His loneliness wasn't weakness, it was consequence. The life had isolated him, stripped away normal human connections, left him suspended between worlds. That made him simultaneously more dangerous and more accessible. A man without attachments was harder to leverage, but a man who remembered what attachments felt like, that man could be reached. Irina approached the bar, ordered tea in German, accented with the slight Baltic inflection appropriate to her cover. The bartender barely glanced at her. Good, forgettable, exactly as intended. She took her tea and turned, scanning for a place to sit. All the tables appeared occupied except for one empty chair at David Ashford's table. She approached slowly, hesitantly, projecting uncertainty. "Entschuldigung," she said softly, the German word for "excuse me," carrying just a hint of nervousness. "Is this seat taken? Everywhere else seems to be full." Ashford looked up from his newspaper, and for a moment their eyes met. His were brown, intelligent, guarded, the eyes of a man who'd learned to read beneath surfaces. Irina felt the weight of his assessment, the instant professional calculation. Threat level, probability of surveillance, potential compromise. She maintained the demeanor of Katya Orlova, polite, slightly embarrassed to be intruding, nothing more than an ordinary woman seeking a place to sit. "Please," he said in German, gesturing to the chair. His accent was good but not perfect, American education showing through. "I don't own the table." "Thank you," Irina replied, settling into the seat and arranging her belongings with the self-consciousness of someone aware she was sharing space with a stranger. She opened one of the books from her satchel, a Russian edition of Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and began to read, or appeared to. In reality, her attention tracked every detail, his breathing pattern, the way his hands moved when he turned the newspaper pages, the frequency with which he glanced toward the windows. They sat in silence for perhaps 10 minutes. Irina sipped her tea, turned pages at intervals appropriate for genuine reading, created the atmosphere of two strangers coexisting peacefully in a public space. The key was patience. Rushing would trigger suspicion. The approach had to feel organic, accidental, natural. Finally, Ashford spoke. "Hemingway in Russian," he observed, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of curiosity. "That's an interesting choice." Irina looked up as if surprised he'd noticed. "I'm a translator," she explained, maintaining Katya's slight accent in her German. "Russian to German, sometimes Russian to English. I like to read books in their original language when I can, though Hemingway, he's American, of course, so this is already a translation. But I prefer Russian translations to German ones. They capture something," she searched for the word, "something more true, perhaps, the sparseness, the directness." "You speak English?" Ashford asked, switching languages. "Yes," Irina replied, matching him. Her English was flawless, carefully honed to carry the same émigré background as her German. "I learned as a child. My family, we moved around a great deal after the war. Displaced persons camps, you understand. You pick up languages to survive." Something shifted in Ashford's expression, not quite sympathy, but recognition, perhaps. "I understand displacement," he said quietly. "Different circumstances, but I understand." This was the opening, the first genuine exchange beneath the surface. Irina calibrated her response carefully. Too much personal revelation would seem suspicious. Too little would close the door. "It's strange, isn't it?" she ventured. "How cities like Berlin become filled with people who don't quite belong anywhere, caught between worlds. Is that how you see yourself?" Ashford asked, and now there was definite interest in his voice, the trained intelligence officer probing beneath the surface while maintaining the fiction of casual conversation. "Sometimes," Irina admitted, allowing Katya's vulnerability to show. "The East is closed to me. My family's choices during the war made that impossible. The West is welcoming in its way, but I'm always foreign here, always explaining myself, always proving I'm not." She stopped, as if catching herself before saying too much. "Not a spy?" Ashford finished, a slight smile touching his lips. It was a test, wrapped in humor, probing for reaction. Irina laughed softly, genuinely amused at the irony only she understood. "Not a communist, I was going to say, though I suppose in this city everyone suspects everyone. It's exhausting, isn't it, the weight of suspicion, the inability to simply be normal." Ashford's smile faded, replaced by something more contemplative. "Yes," he agreed, "it is exhausting." They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing with surprising ease. Irina was careful to let Ashford lead, to reveal information about Katya Orlova gradually, naturally, never volunteering too much. She learned he'd been in Berlin for 2 years, that he loved the city despite, or perhaps because of, its divisions. He appreciated the Philharmonic, particularly their Brahms performances. He missed American coffee, but had developed a taste for proper German beer. He read voraciously, history, philosophy, literature, as if searching for answers to questions he couldn't articulate. When they finally parted, Ashford stood and extended his hand. "David," he said simply. "Katya," Irina replied, accepting the handshake. His grip was firm, warm, direct, human. "Will you be here next Thursday?" he asked, and there was something in the question beyond mere politeness, a genuine hopefulness that caught Irina slightly off guard. "Perhaps," she said, smiling, "if I can find a seat." "I'll save one for you," Ashford promised. Walking back through the snowy streets of West Berlin, past the bright shop windows and the couples hurrying home to warmth, Irina reviewed the encounter with professional discipline. First contact, successful. Cover identity, accepted. Target engagement, initiated. Everything had proceeded according to plan. But as she reached her small apartment in Charlottenburg, modest furnished room, appropriate for émigré translator, and locked the door behind her, she noticed her hands were trembling slightly, not from cold, not from fear or adrenaline, from something else, something she hadn't anticipated. David Ashford wasn't a photograph in a file. He wasn't an abstract target, a problem to be solved. He was real. His loneliness was real, his exhaustion was real, his hunger for genuine human connection was real, and she'd just begun the process of exploiting all of it. Irina stood at the window, looking out at the city lights, at the free West Berlin that existed in constant proximity to the imprisoned East. Somewhere across that invisible line, Colonel Petrov was waiting for her first report, for confirmation that the operation was proceeding successfully. She thought about the warmth in Ashford's voice when he'd asked if she'd return, the way he'd smiled, briefly letting down his guard, The handshake that had lasted a moment longer than strictly necessary, professional distance, she reminded herself, emotional detachment. These were the principles that kept field officers alive, that allowed them to function in the moral twilight of intelligence work, feel nothing real, maintain the performance, complete the mission. She'd done this before. She would do it again. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the divided city in temporary white, covering the scars and the walls and the checkpoints, making everything beautiful and false in the winter darkness. Thursday evenings at the Café Einstein became routine. David and Katya, they'd progressed to first names within 3 weeks, met consistently, their conversations gradually deepening from polite exchanges to something approaching genuine friendship. Irina maintained her discipline, filing detailed reports to Karlshorst through dead drops near the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, documenting every fragment of information that might prove useful. She learned that Ashford had grown skeptical of the Cold War's absolutes, though he'd never say so explicitly. He'd joined the CIA believing in American ideals, freedom, democracy, the containment of totalitarianism, but years in the field had complicated that clarity. He'd seen what both sides did in the name of security, the betrayals, the moral compromises, the ordinary people destroyed by the machinery of espionage. He questioned whether the struggle justified its costs, whether either side could claim moral superiority when both employed identical methods. "Sometimes I think we're mirror images," he admitted one evening in late January, the cafe windows frosted with ice, the warmth inside creating a cocoon of intimacy. Us and them. We convince ourselves we're fundamentally different, but the work is the same: deception, manipulation, sacrifice of individual lives for abstract principles. How do you know you're fighting for the right side when the methods are indistinguishable? Irina, as Katya, considered the question carefully. This was dangerous territory. Push too hard towards sympathy with the Soviet position, and she'd trigger his professional suspicion. But genuine engagement was necessary to deepen the connection. "I don't know if there are right sides anymore," she said slowly. "Perhaps there are only people trying to survive, to find meaning, to protect what they love. The sides, those are constructions, useful for governments, for giving shape to fear. But when you're living in the middle, in a city literally divided by a wall, it starts to feel arbitrary, absurd even. And yet the wall is real," Ashford countered. "People die trying to cross it. The differences may be constructed, but the consequences are concrete, lethal." "Yes," Irina agreed quietly, "the consequences are real. Which makes our choices matter more, don't you think? If the divisions are partly fiction, but the suffering is genuine, then we bear responsibility for which fictions we serve, which sufferings we perpetuate." Ashford studied her intently, and for a moment Irina wondered if she'd revealed too much, if the philosophical sophistication betrayed training beyond what Katya Orlova should possess. But then he smiled, a rare expression of unguarded warmth. "You think deeply for a translator." "Books are dangerous that way," Irina replied, matching his smile. "They make you question everything." By February, their meetings had expanded beyond Thursdays. Ashford invited Katya to the Philharmonic for a performance of Brahms' Fourth Symphony. Irina accepted, knowing this represented significant progress. Attending a public event together signaled trust, a willingness to be seen in her company. She wore a simple black dress, understated elegance, and felt his eyes on her as they met outside the concert hall, snow falling gently on the Kurfürstendamm. The music was sublime, and Irina found herself momentarily lost in it. The tragic beauty of Brahms's Final Symphony, its meditation on mortality and resignation. When the Passacaglia movement began, she felt unexpected emotion welling up, genuine rather than performed. The training had taught her to simulate feelings, but actual feelings were complications, vulnerabilities to be suppressed. After the concert, they walked through the winter streets, neither quite ready for the evening to end. "Thank you for this," Irina said, and meant it more than she should have. "I'd forgotten how music can make you feel human, connected to something larger than survival." "I know what you mean," Ashford replied, his breath visible in the cold air. "There are days when this work makes you forget you're anything more than a function, a tool. Evenings like this," he paused, searching for words, "they remind me why any of it matters, why we fight supposedly, to preserve moments like this, beauty, culture, human connection." They stopped near the ruins of the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, preserved as a war memorial, its broken spire a stark reminder of destruction and resilience. Ashford turned to face her, his expression serious. "Katya, I should tell you, my work is complicated. There are aspects of my life I can't discuss, places I go, things I do. I wouldn't want you to misunderstand if you noticed irregularities." This was it, the opening Irina had been cultivating, the moment when operational cover slipped just enough to reveal the truth beneath. She needed to respond perfectly, to demonstrate understanding without appearing too knowledgeable. "David," she said gently, "I'm not naive. I know what cultural attaché means in a city like Berlin. I don't need details, I just need to know. Are you a good person doing difficult things or something else?" The question seemed to hit him with unexpected force. His jaw tightened, vulnerability flashing across his features before professional control reasserted itself. "I try to be," he answered finally. "I try to be a good person. Whether I succeed, I honestly don't know anymore." Irina reached out, touched his arm lightly, a gesture of comfort, of connection, calculated yet somehow also genuine. "That doubt," she said, "the fact that you question yourself, that you carry the weight, that suggests something important about who you are." They stood there in the cold, the ruined church behind them, two people suspended between truth and deception, neither fully honest but both, in that moment, desperately wishing they could be. March brought the first hints of spring, and with them, a shift in the operation. Colonel Petrov's messages became more urgent. Intelligence indicated the Americans were preparing a major operation targeting Soviet communications infrastructure in East Germany. Time was running short. Irina needed to move beyond building rapport. She needed to gain access to Ashford's apartment, to his files, to the secrets he kept locked away. She orchestrated the opportunity carefully. During one of their walks through the Tiergarten, she mentioned her apartment building was being fumigated, that she'd need to find somewhere else to stay for a few days. The suggestion was subtle, indirect, allowing Ashford to offer without feeling manipulated. "You could stay with me," he said, exactly as she'd anticipated. "I have a spare room. It's not much, but you'd be welcome." Irina hesitated just the right amount, projecting reluctance to impose, before accepting with grateful warmth. "Are you certain? I don't want to intrude on your privacy." "I'm certain," Ashford replied, and there was something in his voice beyond mere hospitality, a hopefulness, a desire for her presence that went beyond the practical. His apartment was in Wilmersdorf, top floor of a pre-war building that had survived the bombing largely intact. It was exactly what Irina expected from the file, neat, organized, sparsely furnished. Books everywhere, history, philosophy, Russian literature in English translation, a record player with a collection of jazz and classical albums. In the bedroom, she glimpsed through the partially open door a photograph on the nightstand. A younger Ashford with a woman, presumably his ex-wife, both smiling in a way that suggested they'd once believed happiness was permanent. He showed her the spare room, truly modest, just a bed and a desk, window overlooking the street. "Not luxurious," he apologized, "but the door locks if you want privacy." That night, after Ashford had gone to bed, Irina waited 2 hours before beginning her search. She moved through the apartment with professional precision, examining everything while disturbing nothing. She found his briefcase in the hall closet. Locked, high-quality mechanism would require tools she'd need to retrieve from her emergency cache. The desk in the living room contained mostly innocuous materials: bills, letters from his mother, draft reports on cultural programs that appeared genuine. The real material would be in the briefcase, or hidden more carefully. Irina photographed everything potentially useful with the miniature camera concealed in her lipstick case, working by moonlight filtering through the windows, ears alert for any sound from the bedroom. She was examining the bookshelf. Sometimes people hid materials in hollowed books when she heard movement behind her. She turned to find Ashford standing in the doorway, wearing pajama bottoms and an undershirt, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. Irina's pulse accelerated, but her training held. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I was looking for something to read. Insomnia. It's a habit from childhood. The camps, the uncertainty. I've never been good at sleeping in unfamiliar places." It was plausible, consistent with her cover, delivered with just enough embarrassment to seem authentic. Ashford studied her for a long moment, and Irina couldn't tell if he believed her or if his professional instincts had triggered suspicion. This was the razor's edge, the moment when operations succeeded or catastrophically failed. Then he moved to the bookshelf, selected a volume, handed it to her. "Try Steinbeck," he suggested. "East of Eden. Beautiful, tragic, ultimately hopeful. Helps me when the darkness seems overwhelming." Their fingers touched as she accepted the book, and the contact seemed to last longer than necessary, charged with something neither could fully name. "Thank you," Irina whispered. "Katya," Ashford said, and now his voice carried a different quality. Vulnerable, almost pleading. "If there's something you need to tell me, something about who you are or why you're really here, I want you to know you can. I would listen. I would try to understand." The words hung between them, an invitation and a test, an offer of trust that could be redemption or trap. Irina's mind raced through possibilities, calculations, potential responses. Protocol said, maintain cover absolutely. Instinct said, he suspects nothing. He's simply a lonely man hoping for genuine connection. Something else, something dangerous, said, tell him the truth. End this deception. Choose differently. "David," she replied carefully, "I'm exactly who I seem to be. A displaced person, trying to build a life. Someone who's grateful to have found a friend. Nothing more complicated than that." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. Ashford nodded slowly, acceptance or resignation clouding his features. "Good night, Katya." "Good night." After he'd returned to his room, Irina sat on the spare bed, Steinbeck unopened in her lap, and allowed herself 30 seconds of complete honesty. She was compromised, not professionally, not yet, but emotionally. David Ashford had become real to her in ways that violated every principle of operational security. His loneliness mirrored her own. His doubts echoed hers. His desire for connection awakened something she'd successfully suppressed for years. This was how agents were destroyed, not by enemy counterintelligence, but by the slow erosion of necessary coldness, by the recognition of shared humanity in those designated as targets. She should request extraction, ask to be reassigned. Someone else could complete this mission, someone less compromised. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. Because somewhere in the past months, this had stopped being purely an operation. It had become something else, something simultaneously more real and more false, something that terrified her precisely because she couldn't fully control it. Irina stood, moved to the window, looked out at nighttime Berlin. Somewhere across the wall, in the east, Colonel Petrov expected results. Somewhere in Moscow, strategists planned operations based on the intelligence she would provide. Somewhere in this divided city, the Cold War's machinery ground forward, consuming lives and loyalties, transforming human beings into instruments of ideological conflict. And here, in this apartment, a man slept who trusted her, who'd offered kindness, who'd suggested she could tell him the truth even as he remained locked in his own necessary deceptions. Spring was coming. The operation was approaching its critical phase. Decisions would need to be made that couldn't be unmade. Irina finally opened the Steinbeck and began to read, losing herself in someone else's story, someone else's struggle between sin and redemption, between what we are and what we might become. Outside, Berlin slept uneasily, caught between two worlds, neither fully one thing nor the other, trapped in the dangerous space between truth and necessary fiction. April brought unseasonable warmth to Berlin, and with it, a sense of urgency that hung over the city like the threat of approaching storm. Irina had been living in David Ashford's apartment for 3 weeks, their relationship evolving into something that defied simple categorization, not quite romantic, not merely friendship, something suspended in the ambiguous territory between. She'd gained access to his briefcase. The tools retrieved from her cache allowed her to pick the lock during his absence at the embassy. Inside, she found what Colonel Petrov needed: encryption protocols for NATO communications, names of Western agents operating in East Germany, operational plans for a surveillance network targeting Soviet military installations. She photographed everything, transmitted the intelligence through established channels, fulfilled her mission parameters. But instead of receiving extraction orders, Petrov's message had been chilling in its brevity. Final phase, target elimination authorized, awaiting execution confirmation. Irina read the decoded message in a bathroom stall at the Zoologische Garten station, then burned the paper, watching it turn to ash in the toilet bowl. Final phase. The euphemism was transparent. She'd obtained the intelligence. Now she was to eliminate the source, remove any possibility of compromise, tie off the operation permanently. This was always the plan. She'd known from the beginning that David Ashford was meant to die. Professional distance should have made this simple, mechanical, just another completion of mission parameters. But professional distance had eroded, replaced by something far more complicated and dangerous. She cared about him. It was that simple and that catastrophic. Not love. She wasn't certain she knew what that meant anymore, but genuine affection, respect, the kind of connection that made his death feel like murder rather than operational necessity. That evening, Ashford came home earlier than usual, his expression troubled. They'd developed a domestic routine. She would cook dinner, simple Russian dishes that reminded her of a childhood she'd half invented, and they would eat together, talking about everything except the work that defined them both. But tonight David seemed distracted, burdened by something he couldn't share. "Bad day?" Irina asked, pouring him vodka. Good Russian vodka she'd procured through East German channels, part of her cover, but also a genuine gesture of care. "Complicated day," he corrected, accepting the glass. He drank, grimaced at the burn, then smiled slightly. "You Russians know how to make alcohol with purpose. American whiskey is smooth, civilized. This demands something from you." "Survival demands something from you," Irina replied, settling beside him on the worn couch. "Vodka just makes it taste better." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Ashford spoke again, his voice lower, more serious. "Katya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest." Irina's pulse quickened, but she maintained calm externally. "Of course. Are you working for Soviet intelligence?" The question arrived without preamble, direct and unavoidable. Irina's mind accelerated through response options: denial, deflection, counter-accusation. But looking at David's face, she saw he'd already moved past suspicion to something approaching certainty. Lying now would only confirm what he believed. "Why do you ask?" she said carefully, neither confirming nor denying, buying time. Because I ran your background through our databases, Ashford replied, his tone flat professional. Katya Orlova exists. Documentation is perfect. History checks out. Employment is legitimate. Too perfect. Too clean. The kind of cover that takes years to build. Resources only a state intelligence service could provide. And certain aspects of your behavior. He paused, pain flickering across his features. Certain aspects suggested training, expertise beyond what a translator should possess. When did you know? Irina asked quietly. I suspected after the first week, Ashford admitted. Confirmed it a month ago. You're very good, Katya, or whatever your real name is. If I hadn't been specifically looking, if I hadn't... He stopped, swallowed hard. If I hadn't wanted so desperately for you to be genuine, I might have acted on my suspicions earlier. Instead, I let it continue. I told myself maybe I was wrong, maybe I was paranoid, maybe I could have just one real thing in this God-forsaken life. The honesty was devastating. Irina felt something inside her crack, the careful compartmentalization that had protected her from the moral weight of her actions. I'm sorry, she whispered, and meant it with an intensity that frightened her. Are you here to kill me? Ashford asked, his voice remarkably steady given the question. Yes, Irina answered, because lying now would be the worst betrayal. That was the plan. Gather intelligence, then eliminate the source. Clean, untraceable, necessary for operational security. Was? Ashford caught the past tense. What changed? You changed it, Irina said, turning to face him fully. You were supposed to be a target, a problem to solve, but you became real. Your loneliness was real. Your doubts were real. Your kindness was real. I wasn't prepared for that. The training covers seduction, manipulation, even simulating emotion. It doesn't cover what happens when the emotions stop being simulated. They sat there, two intelligence officers from opposing sides, their covers stripped away, facing the impossible truth of what had developed between them. Outside, Berlin continued its divided existence, families separated, lovers torn apart, lives constrained by the arbitrary geography of ideology. I reported you, Ashford said finally, 2 days ago, called my station chief, provided my analysis, recommended they pull me out and assigned counterintelligence to investigate. Standard protocol when compromise is suspected. And? Irina asked, though she already guessed the answer. And they told me to maintain contact, to feed you false information, to turn you if possible, or at minimum discover your handlers, your network, the extent of Soviet operations in West Berlin. He laughed bitterly. Everyone's playing everyone. I'm supposed to manipulate you while you manipulate me. Meanwhile, we sit here having honest conversation for perhaps the first time since we met. The intelligence I transmitted, Irina said slowly, was it? Some real, some fabricated, Ashford confirmed. Enough truth to seem credible, enough falsehood to protect actual operations. The encryption protocols you photographed from my briefcase, they were planted, knowing you'd gained access. We've been running a parallel operation, feeding your people misinformation while you've been feeding me vodka and pretending to care. I'm not pretending, Irina insisted, surprised by the vehemence in her voice. That's the problem, David. Everything else is performance. But this, what I feel, sitting here with you, the conversations we've had, the moments of genuine connection, those weren't false. They couldn't be. I'm not that good an actress. Ashford studied her intently, intelligence officer and man at war within the same body. So what do we do now? You're supposed to kill me. I'm supposed to turn you or neutralize you. Our respective organizations expect results. Failure has consequences on both sides. The question hung between them, operational problem and existential crisis simultaneously. Irina thought about Colonel Petrov, waiting for confirmation of elimination. She thought about Moscow's strategists who'd invested years in her training, who expected absolute loyalty. She thought about the ideological commitment that had once defined her, the certainty that she served something larger than individual preference. And then she thought about David Ashford reading Steinbeck in his lonely apartment, attending the Philharmonic alone, questioning whether the work justified its costs, searching for meaning in a world that seemed designed to strip it away. "We choose differently," Irina said, the words emerging before she'd fully considered their implications. "We refuse to be instruments. We acknowledge we've been manipulated by forces larger than ourselves, but we assert our humanity against that manipulation. We just stop playing the game." "It's not that simple," Ashford countered, though his tone suggested he wanted desperately to believe it could be. "We can't just walk away. Both sides will hunt us. We'd be traitors to everyone, belonging nowhere." "We already belong nowhere," Irina replied. "You said it yourself. We're mirror images caught between sides that are essentially identical in their methods. What if the only ethical choice is refusal? What if the only way to win this particular game is not to play?" Ashford stood, moved to the window, looked out at the city lights. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of accumulated exhaustion, years of moral compromise finally demanding accounting. "I've done things, Katya, or whatever your name is, terrible things in the name of freedom and democracy. I've lied to people who trusted me. I've authorized operations that destroyed innocent lives. I've convinced myself it was necessary, that the alternative was worse, that someone had to do the difficult work of protecting civilization. But standing here now, looking at you, knowing what you were sent to do, and knowing I was supposed to use you equally cynically, I'm not sure I can do this anymore." Irina joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel his warmth, but not quite touching. "My real name is Irina," she said quietly. "Irina Volkova. I grew up in Leningrad, daughter of minor party officials. They died during the war, legitimately died, not fictional cover story. I was recruited at university, trained for 5 years, sent on my first operation at 23. I've served in Vienna, Copenhagen, Paris. I've extracted secrets, compromised targets, done things I can't take back. And through all of it, I believed I was serving something important, protecting my country, advancing socialism against capitalist imperialism." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But meeting you, knowing you, seeing myself reflected in your doubts, I don't know what I believe anymore. Except that killing you would be the worst thing I've ever done, and I can't. I simply can't." David, she still thought of him as David, though that was probably cover name too, turned to face her. "If you don't complete your mission, what happens?" "They'll send someone else," Irina answered honestly. "Someone without my complications. They'll eliminate both of us, probably. Loose ends can't be tolerated, and if I do not complete mine, if I do not neutralize you or turn you, I'll be recalled, debriefed, possibly prosecuted for negligence or suspected sympathy with the enemy." David's smile was grim. "We've maneuvered ourselves into an interesting position. We can destroy each other, which is what we're supposed to do. We can destroy ourselves by refusing, or, Irina prompted. "Or we destroy everything else," David finished. "We go public, full disclosure. Tell the world exactly how both sides operate, the methods, the moral bankruptcy, the innocent lives sacrificed. We become living repudiations of the entire system. It won't stop the Cold War, but it might complicate things, embarrass people who deserve embarrassment." The idea was radical, probably suicidal, certainly irreversible, but it held a certain integrity, a refusal to continue participating in machinery designed to dehumanize. Irina considered it seriously, weighing survival against principle, calculating odds against moral imperative. "They'd kill us," she said finally. "Both sides would want us dead. We'd have to disappear completely, reinvent ourselves, live underground, and even then..." Even then, we'd probably fail, David agreed. The intelligence agencies of superpowers don't forgive betrayal. But we'd fail as ourselves, on our own terms, rather than succeeding as instruments of systems we no longer believe in. That has to count for something. They stood there as spring darkness deepened over Berlin. Two people who'd found each other across the most militarized border in human history, who'd discovered connection in the spaces between ideologies, who'd located humanity in the machinery designed to destroy it. "I never thought it would end like this," Irina whispered. "When I crossed into West Berlin last November, I was so certain. The mission was clear, the purpose unambiguous. And now we're just two people," David said, "trying to figure out how to live with some small measure of integrity in a world that doesn't reward integrity." The cigarette smoke hung thick in the briefing room beneath Karlshorst, East Berlin. Major Irina Volkova sat rigid in the wooden chair, her pale blue eyes fixed on the photographs spread across the table like a deck of cards revealing someone else's fate. The face staring back at her from the black and white surveillance shots was unremarkable at first glance. A man in his early 30s, dark hair swept back, strong jawline, the kind of face that disappeared easily into a crowd. That was precisely what made him dangerous. "David Ashford," Colonel Dmitry Petrov said, tapping the photograph with a thick finger. His voice carried the weight of decades in intelligence work, each word measured and final. "Cultural attaché at the American Embassy. Officially, he organizes art exhibitions and jazz concerts. Unofficially..." Petrov slid another photograph across the table. This one showed the same man entering a building near Kurfürstendamm, carrying a leather briefcase. "He coordinates CIA operations throughout West Berlin, dead drops, agent handling, communications with Washington." Irina studied the images with professional detachment, the way she'd been trained at the Red Banner Institute outside Moscow. 5 years of preparation. Languages, seduction techniques, weapons training, psychological manipulation. She'd operated in Vienna, Copenhagen, and Paris. She'd extracted secrets from businessmen, scientists, and military officers. She'd never failed a mission. She'd never questioned an order. "Your cover is solid," Petrov continued, lighting another cigarette. The orange glow illuminated the deep lines, etched into his face, testament to countless operations, countless sacrifices for the motherland. "Katya Orlova, émigré from Riga. Your family fled during the war. You grew up in displaced persons camps, eventually made your way to West Berlin. You work as a translator at the Charlottenburg Publishing House. We've already placed you there. The Americans have no reason to suspect anything." He paused, letting the smoke drift toward the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Ashford is a creature of habit. He drinks at the Café Einstein every Thursday evening, alone. He attends the Philharmonic once a month. He walks through the Tiergarten on Sunday mornings. He's lonely, Volkova. His wife left him 2 years ago, returned to America. The file says he blames himself, worked too much, lived too much in the shadows. Men like that." Petrov's smile was cold, clinical. "Men like that are vulnerable." Irina nodded, her expression unchanged. She'd heard variations of this briefing before. Every target had a weakness: vanity, greed, ideology, loneliness. The key was identifying it, then exploiting it with surgical precision. Emotion was a tool, nothing more. Sentiment was a liability that got agents killed. "Timeline?" she asked, her voice flat, professional. 6 months maximum," Petrov replied. "Build the relationship, gain his trust. We need the communication protocols for NATO's rapid response network in Central Europe. Encryption keys, contact lists, operational procedures. Once you have them, you'll receive final instructions." He didn't need to elaborate. Irina understood what final instructions meant. A car accident on a rainy night, an apparent heart attack. A suicide, perhaps, if it could be staged convincingly. Clean, untraceable, necessary. "The Americans are planning something." Petrov added, his tone darkening. Our sources indicate increased activity across all CIA stations in Germany. We believe Ashford is coordinating preliminary operations for a broader offensive, perhaps an attempt to compromise our network in the East. Your mission isn't just intelligence gathering, Volkova. It's disruption, neutralization, protection of Soviet interests in the most critical theater of the Cold War. She stood, gathering the photographs, committing every detail to memory before sliding them back across the table. 6 feet tall, athletic build from years of training, light brown hair that she would dye blonde for the operation. A face that could be called beautiful, though she'd learned to modulate her appearance, more approachable than striking, more trustworthy than seductive, at least initially. "When do I cross?" she asked. "Tomorrow night. Checkpoint Charlie. You have 48 hours to establish yourself before making first contact." Petrov stood as well, extending his hand. His grip was firm, commanding. "The motherland depends on officers like you, Volkova. Remember that when things become complicated, they always do in the field. Maintain discipline, trust your training, complete the mission." Irina returned to her apartment in Lichtenberg as dusk settled over East Berlin. The building was standard Soviet construction. Grey concrete, small windows, the smell of boiled cabbage and coal smoke permeating the stairwell. Her flat was sparse, a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, a hot plate, a radio that only received approved frequencies. She owned nothing that couldn't be abandoned in 30 minutes. She spent the evening reviewing her cover story, rehearsing the biographical details until they felt more real than her actual past. Katya Orlova had a dead brother, a mother who died of tuberculosis in 1951, a father who drank himself to death 2 years later. Katya loved Tolstoy and Brahms. Katya dreamed of visiting Paris someday. Katya believed in God, quietly, privately, the way many émigrés did. Katya was lonely, searching for connection in a city divided by concrete and barbed wire, by ideology and fear. At midnight, Irina allowed herself one moment of genuine reflection. She stood at the window, looking out at the darkened city, the few lights that burned in apartment blocks, where families slept, where children dreamed, where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. She'd given up that possibility years ago, when the recruiters came to Leningrad State University and saw something in her, intelligence, discipline, coldness perhaps, a willingness to serve without question. She told herself it was patriotism, duty, protection of the socialist future against American imperialism. But in quiet moments like this, she wondered if it was something else entirely, an escape from normalcy, from the suffocating predictability of marriage and children and growing old in a communal apartment. This life offered purpose, importance, the intoxication of secrets and power. Tomorrow, she would become someone else. She would cross into the West, into the territory of the enemy, into a world of deception where every smile was calculated and every word a potential trap. She would meet David Ashford. She would make him trust her. She would take what she needed, and if necessary, she would kill him. The wind rattled the window frame, carrying the distant sound of a train moving through the night. Irina turned away, methodically packing the small suitcase that Katya Orlova would carry into her new life. False documents. Worn clothing appropriate for an émigré of modest means. A photograph of people who weren't really her family. A small Orthodox cross on a silver chain, theatrical prop, useful for establishing credibility. She felt nothing. That was important. That was survival. At least that's what she told herself.